There have been a couple arguments on the campaign trail about development impact fees. We should be charging developers fees for open space and things like this. What's your view of impact fees?
It's interesting. When South Lake Union was developed, one of the arguments was that there would be development impact fees for that area, and that we've never followed through on that. In fact, our transportation department was given through a resolution from the city council to look at impact fees as a means, and it was never followed through on, which I suspect is probably due partly to political pressure. There are other communities, I think Redmond and some other communities in the region that use impact fees. You have to get the nature of impact fees is that if you're building greater density that has an impact on the environment, that means there's additional public costs. So the impact fee is that the public portion will charge a fee not just to extract more profits from that development, but to provide the amenities in that area so that development is a success. And I don't think that's been argued very well to the developers. I think they see impact fees as primarily a negative thing occurring to them. But it can be positive to them as well. And so I think it's a question of moving forward with the developers to show them examples, and maybe do it through pilot programs, do it incrementally as we go along, that impact fees can have, down the road, be more profitable for developments.
Gary, I actually have a question. I'm
Jump
sorry,
in.
just butting in.
Please jump in. Yeah.
I'm part of the Capitol Hill Community Council, and so as you can imagine, we're very active in the whole discussion about the light rail station that's going on down the street here on Broadway, and we're very active about the transit-oriented development conversation as well. And one of the questions that keeps coming up time and time again, speaking of creating a space that's more pleasurable to be in and of use to the community that it's going into. And you mentioned really quickly just the need for open space and how that contributes to pleasurable living experience. But one of the things that we lose as a community on Capitol Hill when we build up in such things is affordable spaces for private artists or for community groups that don't have money or whatever. Right. But so what I keep hearing is the need for community space, whether that's open or whether that's enclosed as a cultural space or meeting space for community groups. Is there much of a discussion of that going on for the rest of the city?
Well, there is a tremendous discussion going on right now that I headed up called Cultural Overlay Districts, and created an advisory group, CODAC, Cultural Overlay District Advisory Committee, and just released its reports. We did that because the Capitol Hill community came together and said we're losing low rented space for a number of our cultural and artist institutions, working space for artists as well as living space for artists. And Capitol Hill is somewhat unique from many other neighborhoods for the concentration, but the other communities don't have it. And so we created this group, we come out with some recommendations, and it's basically a combination of both regulatory and incentives. And we had developers at the table talking about it and going forward. But we also invited people from other communities, Georgetown in particular, and I think there was someone also from either downtown or Fremont. So to answer your question, when we do have these transit-oriented developments, we have to make sure that we're not changing the character of the neighborhoods is such that we don't want to homogenize neighborhoods. I mean, quite honestly, that's happened somewhat already with Belltown. I've seen Belltown, many of the lofts there and many of the artist workspaces and rental spaces have gone. There's some that still remain. So the city can play an aggressive role, a positive role in saving those spaces. And again, it can do so through, again, a combination of regulatory and incentives. But it can't do it with just one or the other. Just can't do incentives and expect developers to do it, because they're not going to do it. You have to have regulatory, and that comes down to, for instance, if you go extra height, you have to make sure there's so much space for community development. A perfect example is, again, in South Lake Union, I had the legislation amended so that when we sold land to Vulcan, which was a large purchaser of city property, I said they had to provide 10,000 square feet for cultural use. And they did somewhat through the investment in the armory. But that was something that we did through sale of our land. So we can continue to do that, those sorts of, what I would say is push the public envelope for the public benefit. And what's really interesting is that even though there's often there's immediate sort of resistance from private investors, so often they're looking at their bottom line for that development. We're looking at the long-term bottom line for the community. That's my agenda. That should be the agenda of the public sector. But in the long run, people who make investments in those communities will in fact have a better profit margin. And so that's the debate that takes place.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I was wondering if we could pivot back to the viaduct. Wanted to understand if, as you're talking about, you look at the whole package and you see that the tunnel isn't going to pencil out. Which alternative would you like to turn to, if not the tunnel?
Well, I don't think, politically speaking, that the elevated's going to go. There's too much of a block of citizens. I don't think it's the majority, but it's certainly a very significant block that will not see an elevated. And we've had this discussion as well. I always felt that a slimmed-down elevated could fit within a renovated waterfront, but I think that's off the table. There was a proposal for what was called a couplet on the surface, two one-ways, and that I think had some merit, so I would look at that closer. I have a number of objectives, one of which was obviously you want to gain as much open space as possible on the waterfront. You want to, at the same time, move forward in a way that does not hinder one of our major industries, which is the maritime industry and the manufacturing industrial sector, which account for 37% of our taxes. So it's a very important sector. And that sector does not necessarily agree with another business sector, which is real estate development. So the two of them, there's some tension between those two sectors. The viaduct, and really when we talk the viaduct, we're really talking about two corridors through the CBD. You're talking about the I-5 and you're talking about the corridor that goes closer or through the CBD. For your manufacturing and your maritime industry, unless I-5 undergoes a major redevelopment, and it's still a possibility, they still need that other corridor. So you have to somehow accommodate the freight corridor. And I think you can tease out their requirements from the fear that we're just going to allow for more vehicles going through that corridor. So it may be dedicated lanes for freight, which would seem to be possible. It could be congestion pricing for vehicles other than freight. So there's some sort of combinations that can be done, I think, to reach the concern of making sure that we don't hinder one of the major industrial sectors in our city. The other concerns I had, of course, is just the public cost. I want something that's not going to basically suck away money from the other major projects around the city. And that's the downside potential downside of the tunnel. So those are sort of my three major concerns. And there was a fourth as well, and you have to be recognize that if we go forward with something, we have to ask ourselves what's going to be the minimal impact on the central business district, downtown business. One of the arguments for a deep port tunnel is that it'll have more of a minimum impact. So if you go with another alternative, there has to be some consideration for how to execute that in a way that minimizes what could be a devastating blow for a lot of the downtown businesses.
What would you want you to be, I guess, what people think of as your legacy after you're done?
Well, in this general area we're talking about would be twofold. One would be major expansion of the urban forest canopy. I have suggested, and in fact I'm proposing, a urban forest commission. I've been working with Councilmember Conlon on that, and been sitting down with Mike Mann from the Sustainability Office of Sustainability. And we're hammering out something, and I think we're going to go forward with it, and it'll have a major, I think, impact on guiding the city's development of an expansion of urban forest. And the second is pedestrian safety. I definitely want to pursue safer crosswalks, expansion of the sidewalk system, because if we ultimately expand, whether it's light rail or whether it's the bus system, ultimately all those riders are pedestrians to begin with. So you have to make it safe for someone to actually leave their home to get to the price that they're going to be taking that public mass transit.